New technologies can be the answer to improving efficiencies and to driving down overall well costs. Many operators have turned to managed pressure drilling, also known as MPD, as a solution. Hello and welcome to this webcast, hosted by drillingcontractor.org and generously sponsored by Weatherford. In this video panel discussion, operator, drilling contractor, and service providers will discuss the fundamentals, benefits, and challenges of MPD and how to propel the industry toward full MPD adoption. I'm pleased to welcome this highly qualified panel. I invite you to check the panelists' full bios through the links on this webpage. First, welcome to Mike Vanderstack, Houston-based Senior Technical Advisor for Hess. Mike is active in the IADC Underbalanced Operations and Managed Pressure Drilling Committee and chaired the committee in 2014. David Golden, a 40-year industry veteran, is Drilling and Well Control Manager for Seadrill, based in London. And last but not least, Guy Feasey is Vice President, Sales and Marketing for Well Integrity at Weatherford. Guy is also based in Houston. Welcome, gentlemen. First, let's start with the basics. What is managed pressure drilling and what does it do?
Mike, the answer to that is very simple. It's an adaptive process to manage annular back pressure, essentially. I think that's pretty much the simplest description. Wouldn't you agree?
I'd agree. I'd also like to point out that it's not necessarily new technology. It's technology that's been used on land for many, many years. And in fact, operators 15 years ago have used it offshore in jackups. So it's something that's being adapted now for deep water.
Rotating control devices have been around for a long time, more than 50 years, I think, in the industry. And that's the key component that allows that surface back pressure to be added to allow for that adaptive.
What does that mean, though, Guy, an adaptive process?
In the primary well control barrier, sort of, if you're looking at it from that perspective, you've got your mud weight plus your friction is your downhole mud weight. So being able to actually add surface back pressure allows you now to have your equivalent mud weight being your mud weight plus friction plus surface back pressure. So what that allows the industry to do now is to immediately affect your bottom hole pressure by adding surface back pressure.
One of the most important things is it's not just managing bottom hole pressure. You have the ability through some of these systems to manage pressure all the way along the annulus, which is pretty effective. So if you run into hydrocarbon bearing zones or water influxes or gas influxes, you're able to manipulate your bottom hole pressure very, very quickly and very, very effectively. So I think that on its own is a huge, huge addition to our safety culture. Second of all, the one thing that I wanted to point out about managed pressure drilling and its ability is you entirely close the loop. So you're able to very clearly identify with what the well is doing at all given points in time, all the way through the annulus. So that controllability with the enhanced surveillance really, really benefits the end user.
So a closed loop system, as opposed to all the open pits and open to the atmosphere systems, is what really helps enable us to have much more precise and accurate control over pressure conditions. Is that kind of right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Guy was saying is so important. I mean, traditionally the focus has been on that primary well control being mud weight, and certainly for us at Hess, we've adopted our operating standards to include the addition of the rotating control device and the ECD as part of that primary barrier envelope, which is it's a big step. It's a big step in the industry, especially when you adapt something like this offshore.
Okay, well that's a good, gives me a better understanding of MPD and how it works. But what do we want to use it for? What are the drivers for MPD, managed pressure drilling?
Well, maybe I'll step in. I mean, right now in the industry, although we're in a downturn, the drivers still remain the same. I think as a primary driver tends to be losses. Right now, it seems to be the largest driver. Okay, so right now we probably have maybe a dozen projects we're working on, which are definitely led by the losses alone. In deep water, those losses can be significant, especially in these fractured carbonates, or you have some vulgular carbonates like you might have in Angola or Brazil, which share the same reservoir characteristics. And it's those losses which can exceed over 100,000 barrels. That's a significant cost and really makes those wells impossible to drill.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I would say, the primary driver. However, like Mike did say earlier, I think what we're finding is once you include managed pressure drilling to deal with these losses, all of a sudden that toolbox that the drilling engineer has is now much greater, and allows them to actually maybe even redesign the well or start looking at other efficiencies. I don't think enough emphasis is put on the safety aspect of this, because it's you can dynamically affect well control before you ever get to well control.
To identify a kick or an influx or an event. I mean, I don't even want to refer to them as kicks with managed pressure drilling. When you have an event that would lead you to believe that you have a small influx from the reservoir, the ability to pick that up in gallons versus barrels, I mean, your reaction time is exponentially, enhanced, right? So, a good drill crew on any given day could pick up a 10-barrel influx, possibly. By the time they shut the well in and do the appropriate steps to make sure that the well is secured, we're talking about potentially 3, 4, 5, 10 minutes. If you look in comparison to MPD gives you the ability to make that choke adjustment with the well already shut in effectively through either the riser or surface BOPs with the rotating control device immediately. So your influx is minimized significantly. We're talking about a 30-barrel, or a 10 to 30 barrel influx versus a 30-gallon influx. So it's incredible.
So if I'm understanding this, we've got a system that allows you to, if I can say it this way, drill the undrillable well. It improves safety, and at the same time, it gives us step change in ability to control downhole mud weight pressure. Sounds like a win-win-win all around to me. So how do we go about doing this? You mentioned, Mike, several different systems. What are some different types and applications for managed pressure drilling?
For a company like Hess, we use a ton of controlled pressure drilling techniques, not the least of which is managed pressure drilling, where we can constantly control the bottom hole circulating pressure. But certainly there's other applications which include maybe dual gradient drilling, or which may include performance drilling with air. These are all sort of, in my mind, derivatives of a similar environment where you've got a closed circulating system and you apply a very detailed control to the overall system.
Okay. I think from a drilling contractor's perspective, what these closed systems give us is the ability to maintain control at all times. Conventional drilling, you actually have no control during connections, various times with instant losses. I think here is this, you've got the well closed in permanently, in effect. You've got drill crews who know they will see an event almost instantaneously. In reality, the crews today with open annulus drilling don't expect to see small influx. They don't even look for them. But with this, you can see instantly. And I think it takes a huge pressure off the driller, who has surrounded with too much information, too many things to consider. Use a very simplistic method to see if anything's happening. It's a huge step forward.
Having an eye problem and finally putting on glasses for the first time.
Absolutely.
The enhanced surveillance of the flow in and the flow out, and the controllability downhole. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's very good.
Early kick detection as such, which is one fundamental part of MPD, is justifiable by itself to have in the system. And what we're talking about is measuring flow in and flow out. You remove all surface volume, everything through the shapers, the whole surface system don't matter anymore. You're measuring exactly what goes in and what comes in, which is about 50 years overdue in my opinion.
I think the one thing that is unfortunate, underbalance drilling sort of was the beginning of this control pressure drilling thing, right? And we're talking about live wells at surface and producing while you're drilling and in a constant state of influx, right? And then managed pressure drilling sort of tied in on the back of that. And unfortunately, the perception in the industry is when you mention managed pressure drilling, a lot of people go back to this underbalance philosophy, and they believe that managed pressure drilling is actually a very similar thing to underbalance, and it couldn't be further from the truth. In underbalance drilling, the objective is to preserve the reservoir by never allowing any influx into the pore throats and into the reservoir itself. Whereas with managed pressure drilling, you're never truly underbalanced. With the combination of your mud weight, your back pressure, and your ECD, you're always in a controlled environment. So I think we need to break the overall perception of how MPD is viewed in the industry. I don't know, Guy.
No, I mean, I think that goes back to our first comment as far as what is the adaptive process and how does that change the industry. Well, it changes exactly like how Mike said, because in a traditional sense, your mud weight was just purely your mud weight and your friction. And if you needed to change your overall primary barrier, you would have to circulate the entire fluid out of the well and replace it with a different one, which would take forever. Now, equivalent mud weight is statically overbalanced, so you're not underbalanced. You're adding the ability to have a surface back pressure, which is not possible in an open atmosphere system. I think that is number one, the big step change that the industry really has to, and it certainly has been understood by companies like Hess and Seadrill, but I think the greater industry needs to sort of adopt it a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think.
The term static underbalance is hugely misused also, yeah. The fluid column can be static underbalance, but it doesn't mean the well will get underbalanced because you induce back pressure. And I think that subtle point is hugely important. You'll never get in an underbalanced situation with a closed system.
I think it adds a lot of fear, a lot of fear. So, in fact, the things that you can do with a statically underbalanced, if we're using that term, system, by adding a little bit of back pressure. Now, what you can actually do with that is, before even the early kick detection side of things, is you can actually do your barrier verification. Okay, so you can dynamically manipulate that surface back pressure to actually find exactly what your pull pressure is and exactly what your fracture gradient is. In Mike's case, in Hess, if you actually have to prove that you are within the safety case, let's say for example half a ppg from either, or you can actually, you can hang your hat on that number. It's no longer a prediction. I mean, yeah. So normally the drilling engineers will choose a mud weight based on a pull pressure prediction, for example.
I think that the other kind of neat thing about the controllability of the system is you allow yourself the ability to have, depending on depth, obviously, and how much back pressure actually affects the bottom hole condition, but you can have as much as a pound or more swing in your pounds per gallon equivalent. So your equivalent mud weight could be anywhere from a 12.5 to a 13.5. So I mean, if you think about that purely logistically, I mean, if I'm drilling with a 13-pound mud weight and I can balance between a 12.5 and a 13.5, and I start to see some seepage losses, I can compensate for that on the choke immediately and cure the losses in most cases. Alternately, if I start to see an influx, I can control my choke and be able to control that influx immediately. And we're talking about days and days of rig time savings, because you're not circulating systems around, you're not having to dump and dilute mud, you're not having to mess around with the system at all. You can be doing that while you're continuing to drill.
The other benefit is identification and response time. So I don't think the industry, is that bad at identifying like a kick. The problem is, where have you identified it? In a lot of cases, and this is why there's a lot of requests in the industry for riser gas handling. Okay, because they're like, well, we need to be able to deal with this kick. But the reason is because they've identified it too late. And what happens in a riser gas handling incident is that the driller has just not seen that slow intensity kick, which is still in a single phase, still in a liquid phase. They haven't seen it come past the BOPs in a deep water environment, and then all of a sudden it will just unload on them, which happens so quickly that human intervention by pressing a button to close the annular or diverter, sorry, in a traditional sense, he doesn't have enough time, or she doesn't have enough time. So the ability to identify the kick at the reservoir level and actually do something about it at the reservoir level is far different from what happens in the traditional sense, where the driller might not identify the kick until it's past the BOP. What that allows a lot more time as far as the response to dealing with that, and pretty much mitigating the risk of having these riser gas handling events.
A major upside is you know where the influx is. It's at the bottom of the wellbore. In a conventional situation, you don't know how far that influx has moved up the annulus at all.
Yeah.
I think that's fundamental. That you find out at some point later. That's proven this.
The level of technology now almost is to a point where our models can tell us where the smallest influxes are in the annulus the whole way up. If you're in a managed pressure environment and you start to become closer and closer to that balanced state as you get further and further into the wellbore, taking an influx at a higher level in the annulus can be identified as well,
That's right.
mathematically through the models. So I mean, it's
It's a huge step forward.
we've all watched trend lines, right? And we all sit in front of computer screens and watch straight lines go straight. And after a while, you just become kind of numb to it potentially, right? And a driller now, let's take on a Seadrill rig, for example. I mean, there is so much information, right? For you to imagine that he's watching that one trend line to make sure that he doesn't have an influx, or the alarms are set sensitive enough that gains and losses are seen. I mean, it's too much to ask. We have the ability now with some of these systems to be able to manipulate choke position based on what's happening in the wellbore on their own. It takes out the human element altogether. And automation, I mean, there's people on both sides of that fence, whether automation is the key or not. But I can tell you that if it's automation and alarmed,
Yep.
or if it's automation and a notification, I mean, there's some value there.
I want to come back to one point so we need to draw a sharp line between underbalanced operations and managed pressure drilling. Underbalance being primarily a technique, even though it's a drilling technique, it's really done to preserve the reservoir
Correct.
integrity and not damage the formation. And it's drilled, yes, at pressures below the reservoir pressure, and those reservoirs are usually underpressured anyway. Whereas MPD is above balance, and it's really a drilling technique for all the reasons that we've talked about thus far.
I think
So
if-
that's one myth, one misconception that's important to
I
consider.
think one significant point to add when we're talking about having a closed system and the ability to detect a kick much sooner. The well is already closed down. Today, with an open
Right.
angular system, there has to be a positive action by an individual who we all know sometimes can be pressured not to do anything.
Yeah.
This is by default closed in. Literally all you have to do is stop.
Yeah.
And the situation is contained immediately. And you know exactly what's happened and exactly where.
Well-
which I think
And I think to the point of if I was to put my operator's cap on, I would the other advantage of that is if you do allow an influx in a traditional open atmosphere environment to get away on you, it's not just the environmental potential as well as the potential to harming the equipment and personnel, of course. I don't know which is more significant, but the pressure that you're exposing your wellbore to is also significantly reduced, because if you allow that influx to grow to a larger size, well, inherently you're going to be adding pressure to the wellbore. So this is why in a lot of cases where wells have undergone some serious well control events, they might be able to control it, but they can't go back to the well and drill it again because
Yeah,
the
sure.
wellbore has been pretty much destroyed.
The other side of that is when you start to circulate out of it, when you take an influx in a conventional environment, there's a process, whether it's the driller's method or the weight and weight method or whatever that method happens to be, but all of those include shutting in the well, slow circulating rates, and pumping up a kill or a choke line. Now again, I'm adopting this to a deep water application, but imagine a world where instead of 36, 48 hours of circulation time, you could do this at full circulating rates and not allow the bubble to expand inside of the riser. Key to that is what you do when you pump a slow circulating rate is you allow the bubble of gas, let's say, to expand, and then you handle that gas at surface. In managed pressure drilling, you can be circulating at full pumping rates. That means you can be circulating the well out in 4 hours versus, however many hours, whether it's 24 hours or whatever.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And the other side of that is you never run the risk of overpressurizing, like what Guy's saying.
Yeah.
So you're never overpressurizing the wellbore or the riser.
Sounds like great stuff. Given all these advantages, how widely is managed pressure drilling used around the world?
For us at Hess, we use it on, in sort of every asset that we have has some form or another of control pressure drilling. So it's safe to say that we are adopters of this technology in one way or another. It's a valuable tool for us.
Guy, what do you thought?
And how widely it is used globally. So, of course, not enough, right?
I agree.
Absolutely not enough because, but from you've got to separate it. You've got your land and you've got your fixed rigs, and then you've got your floating vessels. So, speaking from the deep water standpoint, the adoption is not as high as everybody would like it to be, because there are some integration issues that we have to get over, and this also hasn't been led by operator led. So having said that, I would say that about maybe 10% of the deep water rigs have had a lot of focus on integrating managed pressure drilling. Once again, I think it has to be operator led, and what I've seen in the recent past is operators actually requiring the drilling rigs to come completely capable of doing managed pressure drilling. So
I don't mean to interrupt, but the downside is that the people that are contracting the rigs in global supply chain typically don't fully understand what the ramifications of that are. And so it's easy to say we want our rig to be MPD compliant or MPD able, but what does that truly look like? Is that a riser gas handling system, or is that an RCD on the corner of the deck? So I think the perception of that needs to be a little bit clearer.
I think to sort of expand on that, typically when we get tenders today for drilling rigs from operators of all ilk and sizes, frequently says MPD capable. When we ask what does that entail, get a lot of waffle back. People think it's a good idea, they don't know what it is and they don't know what to use it for. What I do think is happening when yes, it should have more acceptance in the market, but I think it's coming slowly. I think understanding is growing, and it's critical for everyone to understand what is its purpose, not what does it cost. No, we don't want that on our rig. I think the opposite is true. I think the trend where it's moving from being third-party supply through an operator towards the drilling contractor is a trend that's irreversible now, and I think that finally will be the driver to get it universally accepted. I think we're moving that route.
Can you expand a little bit, David, on some of what Seadrill's done to make y'all's rigs MPD ready?
Yeah, if in an ideal world we would have MPD on every one of our deep water rigs for sure. However, there are commercial considerations. Who's going to pay for it? And the interrelationship with the operator. We have some operators just don't want it. We have other operators who would. Then they have preferred suppliers, and then they have the interference model where start to tell you what you're going to do and not. I think that's been a learning process, and I think it continues to be a learning process, and I think it will become established as permanent rig equipment in the not too distant future. That's what I'd like to see go for sure.
Guy?
So, I talked about deep water, but if you look at land, for example, and let's look at land. I mean, I think the North American continent is pretty unique in that the majority, and I'm saying the majority, more than 50% of rigs, they all have a rotating control device. Right? So, if it's good enough for land, I think definitely it's there's been considerable work to demonstrate that the benefit to the land operations as far as de-risking those wells, utilizing a rotating control device. So the same applies clearly for deep water. It's just the understanding of the industry, like David said. Sometimes they call for a riser gas handling system, but riser gas handling is an open atmosphere system. In the greater sort of terminology, our definition of riser gas handling always has a rotating control device in it because it takes away the human interaction of having to close the annulus in a riser unloading event. So I think we just need to make sure that we, as an industry, define what maybe the generic offering for an MPD capable rig is, and I think Seadrill is certainly one of the adopters in this case. And
the benefit internally we see it's safer by an infinite factor than conventional operations. I think it's an enabler towards more efficient drilling, which in the commercial world we live in is not insignificant either. And so putting all the benefits together, then it's going to happen.
I think for us it's very little to do with cost, simply because it completely takes away an element of risk when it comes to our crews and our rigs. I mean, that again, like you said, I mean, the closed system, I mean, it's critical to us. It's a critical component to us moving forward. All of our land rigs have run on RCD on them. Certainly, we have had some exposure at Hess with jackups and deep water vessels, and we've experimented with this as well. We're pretty pleased with the results. We've had a very good safety run. We've had a very good operations run, and
That's excellent.
And I'll add one more thing as far as the how widely used this is. I think it's geographical. You have to, you have to say, if you look at the deep water assets off of Brazil and off of Angola, which are the same reservoir, like I mentioned, those are valular carbonates. Those wells cannot be drilled. So, in those cases, any wells drilling in a particular reservoir in those areas are required to have a managed pressure drilling system on it. Same in Angola. In Asia Pacific, it's slightly different. It's an archipelago that has a different fingerprint. Let's say when you look at the carbonates, they're fractured carbonates. So the reason for the losses is completely different in that sense. If you look at other areas, let's say maybe the top of South America, for example, it's a very tectonically active area. So what you're having is losses that are dominated from a different process. You're talking about some very, very complex structures, which brings into it other factors, which are like some regression as far as the fracture gradient and the pore pressure, which then also increases the requirement for managed pressure drilling. Now you're dealing with no windows, right? So you're also having issues with so tight margins. You might have overpressure zones, and then because you're having to fluctuate between pore and fracture pressure so frequently, you're artificially creating fractures, which get you into a kick loss.
Yeah. So there's one thing I want to add to that. So the way that managed pressure drilling is, the rotating control device, the flow lines, the closed-in system, the closed loop system. I think what we haven't talked about yet is the ability to be able to switch from a managed pressure environment where you're holding back pressure at surface to control pressure at bottom hole or some point in the annulus. But what happens when you drill into a karsted formation and you take full losses? I mean, that's just as harmful and just as something that is feared by drillers alike, as one of the worst events to happen, because then you're on a kick loss scenario potentially. But with your managed pressure drilling kit on board, making the transition from MPD to mudcap drilling, whether it be floating or pressurized, is also immediate. And you do that entirely with the well closed. So I think you can understate that. I mean, for many operators around the world, drilling into these karsted formations, Asia is one of them.
Yeah.
It was a hotbed for managed pressure, or for mudcap drilling.
Yeah.
So I think the ability to adapt very rapidly from one system to another using the same equipment, I think that's a great thing as well.
A lot of distinct advantages, but is managed pressure drilling still economical in today's oil price environment?
Short answer is yes.
Absolutely.
This is what, our fourth since 86, 98, 2009 now. I mean,
I'm running out of fingers, Mike, on which to count them all.
so in recent history, it's
Yeah.
in those four. And those four, of all of those, have been involved at some level in underbalance and managed pressure drilling. And I'm not going to speak for the service company. I know that everybody's feeling the pinch right now.
Mhm.
I mean, I can't speculate what oil is going to be, obviously, but what I can say is enabling technologies that help us get our bid on bottom and keep our bid on bottom longer and more effectively are not things that we are going to shy away from. We're not going to cut corners at Hess, certainly, to save a buck,
Sure.
under the assumption that we may lose. It's what's that saying? Save a penny to
Yeah.
make it down, whatever it is.
Yeah, penny wise, pound
Pennywise,
foolish.
pound
Yeah.
foolish, that's the one. At the end of the day, it's not important to us because we're not going to sacrifice safety and we're not going to, shortcut our way around this and through this. So to us, it's a drilling mitigation tool.
But regardless of the oil price environment, it's an efficiency enabler when drilling wells. Regardless whether you get $40 or $140 an hour, you have better control all the time. You can drill at optimum rates all the time. You can trip out of the hole when you couldn't in a conventional circumstance. So you get those benefits regardless of the state of the market. And for once, we often talk about safety being the first thing of all. All of these events result in a safer operation.
Agreed.
That's the result of all these initiatives that are provided by this system. And it's great to have that as a final outcome.
Being safe saves money too, right?
Well, and people controlling the purse strings is far more important, and I'm sure you'll agree, Mike. So the status quo, as far as that's accepted. We know we have an X amount of NPT, non-productive time, or we're expecting to deal with this amount of losses. Well, that I'm sure you're being challenged. That the status quo is being challenged. So if an acceptable case, accepted losses, accepted NPT was the case before it's getting challenged, and so I think that regardless of the implementation cost, it's far outweighed by the benefits. There's no question.
So Hess has adopted a lean methodology, and I talked to you guys before we did this interview. And what lean technology means to me and certainly to Hess is not about let's get it for the cheapest cost and cut costs and get rid of things. It's about optimizing what you do. And part of that is the cycle that we refer to as the plan, do, check, adjust cycle, which I know that Weatherford does at some level, and Seadrill does at some level as well. It's not new to the industry. But what it does is that following that cycle helps MPD and other technologies become part of your natural operating rhythm. So when you standardize things, which include managed pressure drilling, it becomes part of what you do every day. And when you start to do that, when you go back to your plan, do, check, and adjust, at your adjust phase, you can say, okay, how do we optimize that cycle again? And continuing to grow on something that's new and exciting for deep water applications like MPD, there's a real huge upside for us, certainly as an operator.
So that's bringing me to the next point, what is the ultimate potential for managed pressure drilling? You know, is it really a new convention in drilling?
Absolutely.
I think we use some of the examples we've seen on our rigs, which is relevant to the previous point actually. Instead of trying to measure how much faster we drill, how few events we have, when you're measuring something that doesn't happen, it's quite difficult to show benefit.
Correct.
With all the bean counters, they don't like this. What we've done instead is we're drilling, without being too specific, where we are in South America and Brazil. The wells from hell. You can't drill them conventionally anyway, and losses is a bigger problem than well pressure. And we've found on several occasions, the last two particular wells, we took a different view. Okay, we didn't have managed pressure drilling on the rigs. What would we have done? So what you're talking about simply is abandon the well, cement it up, sidetrack, start all over again. So we've been using a different methodology to show the benefit of what we were able to do as opposed to what we wouldn't have been able to do historically. And that is a huge amount of money when you start to look at it that way.
So let's. I'm going to take your top drive off your rig tomorrow. We're gonna put a rotary and a Kelly bush.
Right.
You know, and we're gonna, because that's exactly what you're saying, right? It's like I drilled 400 wells in the Middle East for a government operator, and on well 399 they said, well, we don't need this. We're not taking losses. I know it's not the same technology, but as soon as we turned the air off, they started taking losses. When you don't recognize that something that you're adding to the mix just has such a profound effect on it, it should become the norm.
I mean, would you take ABS off of your car?
I wouldn't take that off my car.
Good analogy. Okay, well, we can move this forward, but I'm sure we have some key challenges remaining. I mean, how can the industry collaborate more fully and work together towards advancing what seems to be a boon technically for our business?
I think having Seadrill say what he said and having Weatherford say what he said is critical.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for us, it's I need to make it easier for my global supply chain team to be able to recognize that this is a technology that's applicable to us and sort of cut down on the difficulty of getting it installed on a rig, because we don't all have the luxury of taking a new rig out of a shipyard. And when we do, potentially it can be retrofitted there. But when we start to take a rig into our field and we're looking at potentially downtime at a spread rate of a rig per day to retrofit piping and things like that, it becomes pretty challenging. So
Yeah.
I really like what they were saying about that relationship between the drilling contractor and the MPD service provider. It's a big deal for us.
It's been a learning process, over the past few years, because we moved from a purely rental and services market to, the driver really did come out of Brazil. When they realized that those wells had to have this equipment on the rig, that created the mass demand for the technology. And so the flip started changing from a purely rental and services module to how are we going to now start a relationship with the drilling contractors to try and pass that knowledge and the competency onto the drilling contractors. So that's been a very steady learning curve for us. We've managed it well, and of course our business model has also had to change. I mean, if you're trying to put an MPD package on a deep water rig for one well that's going to be drilling for a plan of 60 days, it's very, very difficult to justify from an operator's perspective, and from the service provider's perspective.
But for a period, that was a perspective. You'd have a particular exploration well or appraisal well you wanted to drill. Well, let's get all this gear on board and rig it up in the worst fashion possible. Cost huge amounts of money and then take it back off again. I think when we committed to installing the systems permanently, it was a huge decision. Everything was installed to be optimized for the operation, whether you wanted it or not. It's there all the time. That, I see, is the way forward down the road. You don't have to install it on a rig, because all rigs will have it. That is the way you want to go.
Certainly right now, the expertise lies with the service companies. I mean,
Yeah.
arguably the rig contractors are becoming smarter and smarter every day. And certainly there's a part of the drilling aspect that the service companies may not know as well. And so getting the two of them talking and working on it for us as an end user, and being able to call out a rig that truly is MPD compliant, pretty cool.
It's absolute, collaboration at its best, and that continual dialogue is very important. The training is absolutely critical, and creating an environment which actually promotes that is also a challenge. But like I said, we've been learning, over the past 2 or 3 years, and I think we're at the point now in the industry where this can actually now change and now be implemented across the industry. I think before we might not have been, but I think now we certainly are.
Oh, I feel so, and even within Seadrill, it's been a long process to accept it, but it's the best solution.
So the one thing that I see as a way for us to move forward as an industry is certainly not just the conversation between the rig contractor and the service provider, but certainly incorporating our legislators as well as the class certification organizations.
What we found, it's been a real benefit to look to install the systems permanently. A, they become part of the rig equipment, and the process of getting buy-in via DMV, ABS, and getting them to approve the system as part of a rig as a whole, in fact, is a far better solution than having the equipment certified here and the rest of the rig certified here. So it's proved to be a real bonus to achieve that.
Yeah, the difficulty was going from a rental and services business where it's temporary equipment, you take it on and off, to now being permanent equipment. Now has significant ramifications when it comes to the certifying bodies. Once again, there's been a lot of effort spent on that to ensure that the system, which is this managed pressure drilling system, but it's a lot more than that obviously, is integrated into the rig system as a whole in accordance with the certifying body. That's been a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been a huge challenge, but now we have a completely integrated system within a rig that's fully certified by the authorities.
I think the local governments certainly, and most definitely the class certification companies have been incredibly cooperative, and you guys have worked really, really hard to get there. So I commend you.
Well, we have, and it's been a learning curve for them too. They weren't aware, initially what the difference was between a riser gas handling system in its own sense, which is an annular flow spool diverting through a little choke to an MGS, in the most basic sense, to now incorporating extra equipment to make that system, able to do your barrier verification, your riser gas handling, your early kick detection, dynamic well control, which is controlling that well before it becomes a problem, and then to end with managed pressure drilling. Now they've learned all that, so now it's much easier. They know exactly what they're looking for when it comes to certifying. So.
Planning for success instead of planning for failure.
Exactly.
Great, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts?
I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you all for taking part in this today. Thanks to all of you for listening. That's about all we have time for today. I know it's been a lot of wisdom that you've listened to today, kind of like drinking from a fire hose, in my opinion. But please return to the page and tell your colleagues to, you can review the video. And while you're at it, if you have any questions for the panelists, please supply them through the link at drillingcontractor.org. Thank you very much, Weatherford, for your sponsorship, which is very generous for this VPD. And also, of course, thanks to our panelists, Mike Vanderstack, Dave Golden, and Guy Feasy. And thanks to all of you for tuning into this webcast. Please stay safe, keep turning to the right. I'm Mike Killian. See you next time. Bye.